In today's episode of Today in World War II, December 6th, the Finns lay the lumber against the Soviets on the Mannerheim line. A British submarine unfortunately hits a mine off of Albania. Soviet troops launch a massive offensive, counteroffensive against the Germans outside of Moscow. The United States Enterprise, USS Enterprise, and its task force encounter some heavy weather, which does really well for them tomorrow. And finally, the Soviets are able to link up and complete a log road to help the starving residents of Leningrad. Let's get started. Okay, so on December 6, 1939, the Soviet Union continued to attack the Finns on the Karelian Peninsula, and the Finns had withdrawn previously to the Mannerheim Line, and it did not go well. There's no subtlety, generally speaking, when the Soviets attack, or right like nowadays in Ukraine when they fight against the Ukrainians. I mean, it's steamroller ahead, and of course that leads to heavy casualties, and that's what happened today. There were heavy Soviet attacks all along the Mannerheim Line, and they got repulsed right and left with huge casualties. I mean, one thing the Russians are not worried about is casualties, and boy, they got heavy casualties and then some on this day of trying to fight against the Finns. It's funny because remember the conditions. It was the middle of winter and it was a cold winter. I mean, we were looking at temperatures, -30, -40 Fahrenheit, but that at that range is pretty much the same Fahrenheit and Celsius. And the Russians were under equipped. They try to be more mobile with skis, but they didn't even have wax on their skis. The Finns, on the other hand, were used to cold weather. They were prepared. They had warming tents. They had all the facilities to rotate crews in and out to stay warm. And as a general rule, it's easier to defend than it is to attack, especially when the Soviets were attacking over open territory, snow, over frozen lakes. And they didn't really have any winter, white covering camouflage either. So they would just come at them in basically summer uniforms, with brown coats, and they were picked off pretty easily. So on this date, at least, the Finns were holding admirably against them. Now, right now, I would love for you to just take one extra 2 seconds of your time. I know you want to get to the next subject matter here, and I'll get to it right away. But just please hit the subscribe button and then click the bell. That way, you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. And as you've seen, I drop these things every single day, right? So just do me a solid and do that for me. I'd appreciate it. Okay, on December 6, 1941, the Soviets launched a major counteroffensive in the Moscow region. The As I told you about in previous videos, the Germans were pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to take Moscow. They were late because of blunders committed by Hitler and the high command. So they ended up being, in thigh deep snow and in -30 temperatures, but they were still pushing forward. And it was interesting because the Germans still didn't know that they were facing an all-out Soviet counteroffensive. Their intelligence had no idea that Stalin had moved crack Siberian divisions from the Far East to protect against a possible Japanese attack and move them to defend Moscow. And now this is when the FAFO, F around, find out part started for for the Germans. And this counteroffensive would end up driving the Germans back about 100 miles and freeing Moscow from the threat of invasion. And just to give you an idea, they got within 10 miles of the Kremlin. That's how close they came. But in this case, this was on today's date that this was a launch of the counteroffensive, and within a few days, the Germans would figure out that wait a minute, this is not just some localized counterattack; they're coming for us. So, what I want you to do to come for me, you talking to me, yeah, I'm talking to you. is to go ahead and go down, and where you see the thumbs up and the thumbs down, click on the thumbs up that likes my video, and then leave a comment like, "Hey, I like it," or "Hey, Death to Stalin," or which is a good movie, by the way, or that's Death of Stalin. But whatever you want, because all I care is that the algorithm sees your engagement and it helps me get this content out in front of more people. So on this date, on December 6th, 1941, the United States aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, and its task group, which consisted of some cruisers and destroyers, screening destroyers, they were on their way back to Pearl Harbor. This again, December 6th, 1941. I wonder if that date means anything to you, but they ran into a lot of heavy weather and they were not able to reach Pearl Harbor on time. They were supposed to get there later that day into December 6th, or worst case scenario, the morning of December 7th. Well, it's funny how little things like that can affect the cause of war. In this case, the USS Enterprise was the leading carrier. It participated in almost all the battles that would come. At this time, the Japanese had six, fleet carriers. They had the most modern planes, the best trained pilots, and they were a formidable force. The Americans only had on this date they had the Lexington, they had the Saratoga, they had the Enterprise, they had the Hornet, and they had the Yorktown, but they were not all in the Pacific. So, but the Enterprise by far was the one that had the best battle record and kept us going, frankly, for a number of months in the future. It was the only carrier that was operational against the Japanese, especially during the Guadalcanal campaign. So just think about this. If it wasn't for some heavy weather that came up unexpectedly, Enterprise could have been sunk on December 7th. So that's interesting if you want to play the what if game, right? And then on December 6th, 1941, the Soviets were able to complete a log road between Zaboria and Lake Ladoga near Leningrad, Russia. Why is that so important? Because, as I mentioned, the Germans decided not to expend men and material and armor in attacking Leningrad directly. They decided to lay siege to it and starve them out. And of course, by this time, the citizens, the civilian population was starving, and they were looking to get whatever they could, whatever supplies they could. And they pressed thousands of civilians into as forced laborers to construct this road over the past month. Thousands died. It was not for I mean, think about that, trying to build a road in snow and that kind of temperature. But it did open up another way to get supplies into Leningrad. And you got to hand it to them. They did everything they could to keep that city supplied. So good for them. And this was a very important accomplishment for them. So I want to thank you for watching this video. Tomorrow's video, December 7th, I think is going to be interesting. So you want to make sure you tune into that one tomorrow. But in the meantime, you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.